The morning began like any other on the far edge of the sheriff's small frontier town, quiet, slow, touched only by the low hum of wind sliding across the dry earth. Sheriff Hayes was finishing his routine patrol near the corral when he noticed something unusual. The horses weren't restless, but they were watching something intently. Their ears were angled in the same direction, alert, almost warning. He followed their gaze and saw a figure crouched low beside his chestnut mare. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then the shape shifted, and he realized it was a woman, thin, weary, her dark hair falling around her face like a tangled curtain. Her clothes were worn, dust-stained, and clung tightly to her as though they had weathered far too many nights under open sky. She moved with urgency but not with confidence, her fingers shaking as she worked to untie the rope binding the mare to the post. Hayes froze where he stood, not out of fear but out of recognition. This wasn't the movement of a thief who meant harm. It was the movement of someone desperate. Someone out of options. He stepped closer, deliberately making the wooden boards beneath his boots creak so she wouldn't be startled. She spun immediately, instinctively raising her arms as if preparing for the worst. And in that single moment, the sheriff saw everything, her hollow cheeks, the bruise on her wrist, the exhaustion in her eyes that went deeper than lack of sleep. Pain lived there, and pride too. A quiet, stubborn pride that refused to be broken. She was Apache. And she was scared. "I'm not going to hurt you," Hayes said softly, keeping his hands visible and his stance loose. "Just tell me why you're taking the horse." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her gaze flickered with hesitation. She swallowed hard before answering, her voice barely above a whisper, rough from dryness and days without proper rest. "I need to reach my people. It's far. I have no other way." She spoke English cautiously, as if each word cost her energy she didn't have. Her eyes darted around as though expecting the sheriff to shout for his deputies at any moment. Her breathing was shallow, part fear, part fatigue. Hayes noticed her shaking wasn't from cold. It was hunger. Exhaustion. Fear of the unknown fate she expected him to hand her. Instead, he slowly took one step forward. And she immediately backed away, stumbling against the corral fence. She held herself as though preparing for a blow she'd received too often in the past. The sheriff's voice softened even more. "I'm not here to punish you. But stealing won't help you. If you wait, just a moment. I can help you. Properly." She stared at him, confused. Suspicious. Her brows tightened as if she couldn't decide whether this was a trick or an impossible stroke of mercy. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, someone was speaking to her gently. Not as a threat. Not as a burden. But as a human being. The moment stretched, fragile and quiet, the morning sun casting a warm glow over both of them. Hayes could feel the shift begin, a tiny thread of trust, barely formed, yet strong enough to change everything that came after. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sheriff waited, patient and still, while the Apache widow breathed shakily, trying to decide if his calm voice was genuine, or just another illusion that would shatter the moment she let her guard down. Hayes could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled into the fabric of her worn dress as if bracing herself. He didn't approach her again. Instead, he turned slightly, walked toward the porch, and picked up the metal canteen resting on a barrel. He held it out in her direction. No sudden movements. No authority in his stance, just quiet offering. "You look thirsty," he said softly. "Take it." Her eyes flicked to the canteen, then to him. Her breaths were uneven, shallow, as if her body was torn between instinct and exhaustion. Slowly, very slowly, she stepped forward, each movement guarded. She took the canteen with both hands, her grip trembling as though she expected it to be snatched away. She didn't drink immediately. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the sheriff, studying him as intensely as he had studied her earlier. Trust had never been a luxury in her life. She needed proof, real proof, that he meant no harm. "Go ahead," he encouraged, his voice steady. Finally, she lifted the canteen to her lips. The first sip seemed to hit her like a shock, cool water after days of dryness. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring it. Something in Hayes' chest tightened when he saw that. Water shouldn't make someone look that relieved unless they'd been suffering far too long. When she opened her eyes again, some of the wild panic was gone. Not replaced by comfort, not yet, but by curiosity. Wariness softened just a little. She lowered the canteen and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You ask why I take your horse," she said slowly. "There is danger on the far ridge. My people, they moved. I must reach them before the snow nights begin." Her words carried weight, urgency, loneliness, fear. Hayes leaned against a fence post, keeping respectful distance. "You could have asked for help." She let out a short, bitter breath that was almost a laugh. "No one helps me. Not your people, not my own." A widow without family, she looked away, jaw tightening. "I am only trouble to others." The sheriff felt a quiet ache settle in his chest at her words. He saw the truth in her posture, the way she folded inward, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, as if the world had repeatedly shown her she didn't deserve space. But she carried herself with dignity despite everything, and he respected that deeply. "You're not trouble to me," he said gently. That made her look at him sharply, as if the sentence was too strange to trust. Her eyes lingered on his face, his steady gaze, the way he spoke without hesitation. She wasn't used to kindness spoken so plainly. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you look like someone who's been surviving alone for too long," he answered simply. "And you shouldn't have to." The wind brushed between them, carrying a moment of silence, one that didn't feel tense anymore, but fragile. Something beginning. She clutched the canteen closer to her chest, almost protectively, and her expression softened, not into trust yet, but into possibility. For the first time, she started to believe that this man might not see her as a thief or an enemy. For the first time, she let herself breathe just a bit easier. Sheriff Hayes motioned for her to follow him toward the shaded porch beside the outpost. He didn't touch her, didn't guide her by the arm, just walked slowly enough that she knew she had the choice to follow or not. After a hesitant pause, she did. The porch offered relief from the harsh sun. Hayes set a wooden stool near the steps, then placed another one a few feet away for himself. Enough distance to be respectful. Close enough that their voices didn't need to rise. She stood for a moment, unsure whether the seat was truly meant for her. So he simply nodded toward it with a soft smile. "Go ahead. Rest a minute." Her movements were stiff as she lowered herself onto the stool, as if her body wasn't used to the idea of safety. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, holding them together to stop the trembling. Hayes noticed everything, not in a way that made her feel observed, but in the way a man notices pain he wishes he could ease. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice gentle but steady. "You said you're a widow. I'm sorry for your loss." Her gaze flicked to him sharply, then softened. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge it. Most people either ignored her grief or used it as a reason to dismiss her. She inhaled slowly, feeling the words settle inside her. "He died in the spring," she said quietly. "Fever. Too strong for herbs, too fast for prayers." Her voice cracked just slightly, not broken, but carrying the weight of memories she rarely shared. Hayes leaned forward a little, forearms resting loosely on his knees, careful not to invade her space. "That must have been hard," he murmured. She nodded, her eyes drifting somewhere far away. "My people, they cared at first. But after his passing, I did not belong anywhere. A woman without a husband, she is a shadow to some, a burden to others." The way she said it, calm yet deeply wounded, made Hayes' chest tighten. She wasn't asking for pity. She was simply stating the truth of her life, as plainly as she might describe the weather. Her fingers trembled again, and she clasped them even tighter. Hayes noticed the small bruise on her wrist and the way her breathing changed when she spoke about being alone. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't reach out, not yet. She was still fragile with distrust, and he wouldn't break that fragile thread forming between them. Instead, he softened his voice even more. Being alone doesn't make you a burden. She blinked at him, almost startled, as though she'd never heard those words spoken without an agenda. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to respond, but no sound came out. Something inside her loosened, very slightly, like a knot finally giving way. For the first time, she studied him without fear. The sheriff wasn't loud or intimidating. His eyes were steady, his posture open, his tone clear but warm. He didn't look at her like a problem. He looked at her like a person. Hayes shifted in his seat, not nervously, but thoughtfully. You said your people moved. Why didn't you go with them? Her shoulders sank, and the truth came out in a quiet, vulnerable breath. I wasn't strong enough then. Not after he died. I fell behind. They could not wait for one widow. Hayes didn't speak right away. He let the silence hold her without judgment. She felt her throat tighten, not from fear this time, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being listened to. Finally, he said, well, you're not alone now. Not while you're here. Her eyes lifted to meet his. And in their depth, something new flickered, something achingly small yet undeniably real, the beginning of trust. The beginning of connection. The beginning of a story neither of them expected. By late afternoon, the sky had shifted into a pale amber, the kind of color that promised a calm evening. Sheriff Hayes tightened the saddle on his mare while the widow stood nearby, her hands loosely folded, watching him with a mixture of uncertainty and quiet relief. She still didn't fully understand why he was helping her, not arresting her, not sending her away, but she didn't question it aloud. Not yet. Your people moved north, Hayes said as he secured the last strap. I can ride with you to the ridge. It's safer if you're not alone. She hesitated, glancing at the path that stretched out from the town, a lonely strip of dirt framed by ridges and sagebrush. Her voice was soft when she finally answered. If you ride with me, I will accept the help. He nodded gently. Then let's go. Hayes guided his mare closer, then offered her a hand, not insistently, just as an option. She paused before placing her palm against his. Her hand was small compared to his, cool at first touch, then warming as he helped her settle onto the second horse he'd saddled for her. It was the first physical contact they'd shared, and though brief, it settled something in the air between them. They began riding at a slow, careful pace. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, it was thoughtful, cautious, shaped by two people learning the rhythm of each other's presence. The wind brushed through the dry grass, carrying faint scents of earth and cedar. Birds lifted from the foothills, their wings cutting arcs against the wide sky. When the trail narrowed between rocky slopes, their horses naturally drew closer. Her leg brushed Hayes for a heartbeat, light, accidental, but enough to make her straighten subtly. She didn't pull away though. Hayes noticed that. He didn't mention it, didn't call attention to the moment, but he felt it like a quiet spark. After a while, she spoke. My husband used to take this path. He said the wind here sounded like voices of the mountain. Her tone was soft, not aching anymore, but remembering. Hayes looked toward her, his expression gentle. Do you hear it now? She closed her eyes briefly, letting the breeze pass over her face. Yes, but different. I don't feel so afraid of the sound anymore. He admired her strength without saying it outright. The way she carried grief like a heavy blanket, yet walked forward anyway. The way she spoke honestly without demanding anything from him. As the trail widened again, she shifted slightly to ride beside him. Their shoulders weren't touching, but close enough that she could feel the quiet warmth radiating off him. She found herself glancing his way more than she expected, studying the calm in his jawline, the focused way he watched the horizon, the gentle way he held the reins. "You listen more than you talk," she said softly. He smiled. "Most people don't need someone to talk over them. They need someone to hear them." She lowered her gaze, touched, not romantically, not yet, but deeply. "I haven't been heard in a long time." "Then let me change that," he answered. The word settled in her chest, warm and unsettling in the best way. For the first time since her husband's passing, she didn't feel like she was walking through life completely alone. There on the dusty trail, under the fading glow of an orange sky, the first threads of companionship began to weave between them, quiet, fragile, and full of possibility. The higher they climbed into the foothills, the more the air shifted, cooler, thinner, carrying with it the faint echo of something unsettling. Sheriff Hayes noticed it first. A stillness that wasn't natural. Birds weren't singing anymore. Even the horses seemed uneasy, their ears flicking back and forth as if picking up a sound he couldn't yet hear. He slowed his horse. "Stay close," he murmured. She didn't question him, she sensed it too. Her eyes scanned the rocky slopes with sharp instinct, the kind born from a lifetime of needing to be alert. She guided her horse slightly behind his, a silent trust forming in the space between them. A few minutes later, Hayes spotted what he feared, fresh boot tracks pressed into the dry dirt, deep, hurried, heading toward the ridge. Bandits. He moved his horse closer to hers, close enough that their knees brushed briefly. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. "You know these trails," she whispered. "Bandits hide near the narrow pass. They take travelers. Trade them, or worse." Hayes nodded. "That's why I'm not letting you ride alone." The widow glanced at him, really looked at him, and something softened in her eyes. The sheriff wasn't helping her out of duty anymore, she could feel it. His protectiveness wasn't forced or performative. It was instinct. And in that moment, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in months. A sense of being worth guarding. As they continued, the terrain forced their horses shoulder to shoulder. The canyon walls narrowed, the path tightening into a single-file stretch. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but the tension made her chest constrict. Hayes sensed it and spoke quietly, his voice a gentle grounding presence. "You're safe with me." The simplicity of the promise stirred something deep inside her, something she wasn't ready to name. But she let herself lean into the feeling, just a little. They reached a small clearing as the sun dropped lower, the gold light spilling across jagged rocks like warm fire. Hayes scanned the area one more time before allowing them to rest. She slid off her horse, her legs unsteady from the long ride and the stress of the trail. Hayes stepped forward quickly, not touching her, but ready if she needed support. She steadied herself, offering a faint nod of thanks. They sat on opposite sides of a fallen tree trunk, but the space between them felt charged, quiet tension layered with unspoken understanding. After a moment, she asked softly, "Why are you helping me?" "You owe me nothing. I caused trouble for you." Hayes studied her face, tired yet determined, wary yet hopeful. "Because everyone deserves a fair chance. And because when I looked at you, I saw someone carrying more weight than one person should." Her gaze lowered to her hands, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "Most men don't see that. They see only a widow, alone, without protection." "Well," Hayes said gently, "I see someone brave enough to keep going, even when the world hasn't been kind." She blinked rapidly, touched and unsettled by his sincerity. Her throat tightened, and she turned slightly away to compose herself. The sheriff didn't push her. He waited, patient and quietly present. Finally, she looked back at him, eyes softer, warmer, almost shining. "I don't know why, but I believe you." Hayes exhaled, relief and something else, something deeper, passing through him. The danger behind them had created a different kind of closeness. Not just safety. Not just trust. Something beginning to bloom, slow, fragile, and quietly powerful. By evening, the sun had dipped low behind the ridges, leaving streaks of soft violet and rose across the sky. The temperature fell quickly, the dry air turning crisp. Hayes found a shallow canyon shelf, half cave, half overhang, that would shield them from the wind. It wasn't warm, but it was shelter, and today, that was enough. He dismounted first, then turned toward her. "Let me help you down," he offered, voice quiet. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Her fingers were cool from the air, delicate but steady. Hayes guided her gently, the brief contact sending a subtle warmth through both of them. She didn't pull away immediately when her boots met the ground. Instead, her hand lingered in his for a second longer than necessary, just long enough for him to feel her trust settling. They gathered a small pile of dry brush, lighting it carefully. The fire flickered to life, casting a soft amber glow across her face. Hayes watched her sit, drawing her knees toward her chest, warming her hands near the flames. Her expression softened in the light, still cautious, but no longer guarded in the same rigid way she'd held herself earlier. For a long stretch of quiet, they simply sat side by side, not touching but close enough that the warmth from the fire blended with the quiet warmth of each other's presence. The sheriff glanced at her now and then, catching small details he hadn't seen before, the gentle curve of her jaw, the softness returning to her eyes, the faint grief still heavy but no longer consuming her entire expression. She broke the silence first. "Since he died," she said softly, "no one has spoken to me with gentleness. Not even my own people. They mean well, but grief makes others uncomfortable. They forget how to look at you." Her voice cracked around the edges, not broken, just honest. Hayes turned slightly toward her, resting his forearm on his knee. "I'm sorry. No one should face that alone." A small tremble ran through her, and she lowered her gaze. "I don't want pity." "You don't have it," he said gently. "You have respect." Her breath hitched, and she blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself. It had been so long since anyone offered her respect without expecting something in return. She shifted closer, not dramatically, just enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. The space between them warmed instantly. Hayes kept still, letting her choose the distance. She seemed to study his profile in the firelight, her eyes traveling along his jawline, the gentle set of his mouth, the steadiness in his gaze. "You are different from what I expected," she murmured. He smiled softly. "And what did you expect? A sheriff who would take the horse back, and leave me to the road. Or worse." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Not someone who would care if I was afraid." Hayes exhaled slowly, moved by her honesty. He reached out, not to take her hand, not to startle her, but to gently tilt her chin upward with just 2 fingers, giving her the choice to pull away. She didn't. Her eyes lifted to his, deep with emotion she hadn't dared express. The firelight reflected in them, making her gaze warm, fragile, and achingly sincere. "You deserve to feel safe," he said quietly. "And not just tonight." A soft, trembling breath escaped her, half relief, half longing. She leaned in, letting her shoulder lightly touch his arm, her head tilting closer, not resting yet but inviting comfort. Hayes stayed still, letting her lean into the peace she hadn't felt in so long. No kiss. No sudden embrace. Just 2 people sharing a moment of connection so profound it changed everything. The canyon was silent except for the crackle of fire and the quiet beating of 2 hearts, newly aligned in a slow, tender rhythm neither had expected. By the time the last ember died on the sheriff's small fire, the entire canyon felt quieter, like even the wind was holding its breath, watching what these 2 wounded souls would choose next. The widow sat with her knees drawn to her chest, Sheriff Calder's coat wrapped around her narrow shoulders. For the first time in many moons, she wasn't shivering from cold or fear. The warmth came from something far deeper, something she didn't yet know how to name. Sheriff Calder had kept his distance after offering her food and a safe spot by the fire. He didn't push her with questions. He didn't demand thanks. He simply existed beside her, steady, calm, and present. And that presence alone started easing the walls she had built around herself since her husband's death. When dawn finally stretched its pale light across the camp, the widow spoke first. "You should have punished me," she said quietly, her voice trembling, though with emotion rather than weakness. "I broke your people's law. I tried to steal your horse. Why do you show me kindness?" Calder looked at her with the same steady gaze he had offered her since the night began. "Because you weren't stealing to hurt anyone," he answered gently. "You were surviving. And surviving ain't a crime." Those words struck her deeper than he expected. She had not heard compassion from anyone since the day she became a widow. Among her own people, she was pitied at best and ignored at worst. In the nearby towns, she was viewed as a threat before she ever spoke a word. But here was a man who saw the human beneath the hardship. A man who did not judge her by tribe, by rumor, or by fear. Something inside her loosened. As the sun climbed higher, Calder saddled his horse and prepared to ride her closer toward her people's territory, where she said she knew of a safe path. But when he helped her onto the horse, gently, respectfully, she felt something heavy form in her chest. A tightening. A realization. Leaving him suddenly felt harder than she expected. All along the trail, she watched him through her long lashes. Every time he offered her water or adjusted the reins so she wouldn't slip, warmth pooled in her heart, foreign, frightening, but beautiful. When they reached the ridge, the place where their paths would part, the widow climbed down from his horse and held the reins for a moment longer than necessary. Calder noticed, but he didn't mention it. "You'll be safe from here," he told her. The widow nodded but didn't step away. She took a slow breath, then asked, a tremor in her voice, "Sheriff, if I ever wish to see you again, would your door remain closed, or open?" Calder's heart kicked once, hard. "My door," he answered, "would always be open." A long silence settled between them. Then, finally, she allowed a small, hopeful smile to appear. Not gratitude. Not fear. Hope. She turned toward the trail back home, but she did so slowly, knowing she had a place, and a man, she could someday return to. For the first time since her husband's death, the Apache widow did not feel alone. She felt free. And she felt wanted.